the roots of Sikhism go way back. It actually has its roots to the time when St. Thomas arrived in India.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting interview with Jasveer. Jasveer, please introduce yourself before we get started.
My name is Jasveer Bassi, and I'm from a Sikh background. And I believe this interview is going to cover a lot of that, what Sikhs believe, and how I came to saving faith in Christ.
Yeah. So let's get started right away with that topic. Sikhism is one of those religions that it's not huge. Like, it's a pretty big, but it's not like it's not as big as, like, let's say Christianity or Islam, like, billions and billions of people. It's a little bit smaller than that. And some people might not be familiar with it. I know, at least where I'm from, I have never met someone who's from the Sikh background. So if you could, what is Sikhism? What are their, like, sort of main tenets of their faith, and kind of separates them from other religions?
Um, Sikhism is actually now the fifth biggest religion. It overtook Judaism.
Mm.
There are about 27 million Sikhs in the world, mostly in the Punjab, but they're all over the world. You can recognize them because the Orthodox Sikhs wear turban. They do not cut their hair, and people mistake them for Muslims, and they're not Muslims. That's one of the biggest mistakes people make. And unfortunately, even some pastors do not know a thing about Sikhism. So it is something that the church needs to learn about, because they do have a concept of grace, like Christianity, which
Oh, really?
very close to Christianity. Yes. In fact, it occurs far more times in their scriptures than in the Bible. And, so you can build bridges to them. Now, unlike Islam or Judaism, because we're termed the Abrahamic faiths, we do have a similar worldview, and we can relate to the characters in the Bible, etc., when somebody's talking about those religions amongst themselves or in debates. But with Sikhs and Hindus, it's a totally different worldview. And you really have to understand where they're coming from, because they cannot relate to anything that's in the Bible. They don't know any of the prophets. They know Jesus, obviously. Every religion has heard of Jesus. But as for, like, Moses, maybe, but other than that, very little. The only person in their scriptures that is mentioned from the Bible is actually Adam. And apart from that, there is no character from the Bible. There are characters from the Hindu religion, obviously.
Yeah, because I mean, by what I understand, the history of Sikhism comes out from predominantly Hinduism during a time of Islamic persecution. Well, Muslims persecuting Hindus. Am I correct?
Yes, but the roots of Sikhism go way back, because
Okay.
It's known as it came out of what is known as the Bhakti movement, which means devotion, a devotion to God. And originally, Hindus will object, Sikhs will probably object, but it actually has its roots to the time when St. Thomas arrived in India and changed Hinduism forever. And I believe
What time was that? What time frame would that been?
about 52 AD.
Okay.
And in fact, he was there for about 20 years, and that's where he was martyred.
Mm-hmm.
And what a lot of people do not know is that it was the very high caste, the Brahmins, who first embraced Christianity
Hmm.
because their original scriptures had a whole sacrificial system.
Mm-hmm.
Before Hindus became vegetarian because of Buddhism, India was Buddhist for 300 years. So
Mm-hmm.
after that, they remained vegetarians, and obviously the sacrificial system had not been in existence for 300 years. So, but they still had their scriptures, and they knew that one day God Himself would be the sacrifice. So they embraced the gospel immediately. In fact, the very first believers were the Brahmins. And the reason he was martyred was because he was preaching equality, no caste system. There's a
Mm.
caste system in India where you have four main uh, strata or layers. You have the Brahmins at the top, then you have what are termed untouchables. Untouchable in the sense that you can't touch them, otherwise you will become polluted.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and you have to do various rituals to become pure again.
Mm-hmm.
So he preached to the very low caste, who the Brahmins, they were not, they were polluted even by the shadow of an untouchable going past.
Oh, really?
Untouchables were not allowed to even hear the Hindu scriptures. And if they did, they would have, I believe it was very hot oil poured into their ears to render them becoming deaf.
Hmm.
So they speared and martyred St. Thomas because they did not want their discriminatory system in which they had power to be made an equal level playing field where there's
Mm-hmm.
equality. The
Mm-hmm.
reason that that was precisely what Buddhism preached, no caste system. And they had eventually gotten rid of Buddhists and the Buddhist religion from India because of that. And they retained their power. But
Mm-hmm.
were still debates up till about maybe 700 AD, um, because there was still, a remnant of Buddhists and Buddhist ideas. So this is sort of background that people do not know. So
Okay. Mm-hmm.
St. Thomas influenced Hinduism and changed it forever. And in fact, the Om symbol, you've probably seen the Om symbol. It's a Hindu symbol.
Mm-hmm.
They have found archaeological remains, and it was actually originally a Christian symbol for the Trinity.
Oh,
So
interesting.
these are controversial sort of discoveries, but it does seem that Christianity changed Hinduism forever. Because prior to that, it was basically, before Buddhism, a sacrificial system, appeasing God. It was the religion of fear. There was no concept of a loving God or God of grace. It was all a work system.
Mm-hmm.
So that bhakti movement, the devotional aspect of God, loving devotion, as opposed to cold logic, abstract philosophy, uh, is where actually the roots of Hindu Sikhism lie. And
Okay. Okay.
in the South India, like I said, because that's where St. Thomas landed originally, and he actually came to India because there were Jews there there was a community of Jews who had come there after the Babylonian captivity when they were
Hmm.
released. A lot of them stayed in Persia, but a lot of the traders went to India, and there were actually many Jews still in India about 50 years ago, prior to Israel, being formed.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, from South India, it took centuries for that aspect of Hinduism to come to North India, which is the home of the Sikh religion,
Okay.
the first guru. And that was actually brought by they called Bhagats, which literally means devotee.
Hmm.
The most famous Bhagat was Ramanand. I believe he had about five uh, disciples whose compositions are actually in the Sikh scriptures. And
Hmm.
because he knew the southern language of India and he knew the north, he was actually able to bring that movement to North India.
Hmm.
And so you had that aspect coming in at the time of the inception of Sikhism, the first guru. There were 10 gurus. His name was Guru Nanak. And this is in the medieval India in the 15th, 16th century. So at the same time, you had the Mughals who ruled India, in North India. And
So the Mughals didn't rule all of India; they just ruled that northern part of it.
yes,
Okay.
yeah. And they were mainly Sufi Muslims.
Okay.
And I believe it was 7th, 8th century, actually, Islam came, and it was via traders in the south of India also, but it was mainly the Sufi aspect, the mystical aspect of Islam, not
Hmm.
the Orthodox Islam.
Not like the
And
Sunni or the Shia.
no, and the Sufis did not convert by the sword. They converted through compassion, love,
Hmm.
singing of hymns. And if you study, the origin of Sufism, there are various theories, but I believe that it was started in the 8th century in Syria under the influence of Christian monks.
Okay.
And that's where the singing aspect comes in, hymns, loving devotion to God, the concept of grace. So you had these two aspects that actually both Sufism and Bhakti had their roots in Christianity.
Okay.
And Guru Nanak, in the center of his village, was a mosque. So he heard the call to prayer 5 times a day. He knew about Islam.
And this was a Sufi mosque still. This would have been a Sufi mosque.
I'm not sure, whether it would be Sufi, but the Sufis were the ones that they were probably both by then.
Okay.
But the Sufis were the ones who were closer to Sikhism in their
Hmm.
beliefs.
Yes.
So Guru Nanak grew up in that environment, and he was obviously exposed to Hinduism. He was not the highest caste, which is Brahmin. He's the next lowest, which is a Khatri, the warrior caste. And they were generally more of the trading caste.
Okay.
And he was a bit of a rebel against both religions. He refused to go through the Hindu ceremony of wearing the thread, which is like the equivalent of the Jewish bar mitzvah, you might
Okay.
say,
Hmm.
into adulthood. And he actually traveled. There's no actual eyewitness account of the life of Guru Nanak, but there are these writings called Janam Sakhis, which is like accounts of his life. And they do say he traveled to South India, he traveled to Persia. They even say he went to Saudi Arabia. But according to them, he did travel, and no doubt he also came across Christians in the south of India because that's where they were. And after St. Thomas was actually martyred, Christianity became the religion of the lowest of the low class people in India
Mm-hmm.
who have power, didn't have wealth. And so Christianity remained a small group in India. Even today, I believe there's only 13 million Christians in India. And they didn't convert by the sword, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So Guru Nanak started the religion, which some people say is a syncretism of Islam and Hinduism. Sikhs would object to that because they believe he was divinely inspired. This is a new religion, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And Sikhs object very much to having any connection with Hinduism. And this is a hot potato topic even today. So that gives you the background that Sikhism started in medieval India, and it took about 200 years to evolve from the first guru to the 10th guru.
Okay.
The first guru was very much of a pacifist, but the fifth guru was martyred by the Mughals, and after that, Sikhs became armed.
And who were the Mughals exactly? Like, I know a lot of them identified with Islam, but was it like what type of Islam, what type of community was the Mughals?
Well, Babur was the first one who conquered India, and it was actually technology. I believe it was a cannon that was bought from the French, which rendered the vast army of the Hindus with their elephants, etc., useless. And that was how he was able to conquer. And his grandson was Akbar, who was very lenient. He actually wanted a syncretistic religion. He had married some Hindu queens, and he was very, very lenient. In fact, he donated the land for the Sikhs to build the Golden Temple in Amritsar.
Okay.
So he was a lenient Muslim, but after that, the emperors were all very strict, Orthodox Muslims, and hence the increase in animosity against the Sikhs, who they perceived as a threat because they were now armed.
Mm-hmm. And then this went on for the next. So after the fifth guru, then they were armed
Yes.
for purposes of defense, I assume.
Yes. In fact, the sixth guru, after his father was martyred, he wore two swords, one representing temporal power in the world, and the other one spiritual authority.
Okay.
So that gives you a little background. What do they believe? They believe in one God, but that is also very controversial because is it monotheism or is it monism? Or is it pantheism and panentheism? And scholars and Sikhs cannot agree. But
so there's different theories of what this one God would be.
Yes, because the scriptures seem to teach both. In fact, one of the top philosophers and Sikh scholars who I had spoken to, I asked him about this sort of contradiction, because the scriptures say that God is with attributes, as in Hinduism, the term is nirgun, which means not attributed.
Okay.
And at the same time, he is sargun, which means with attributes. And he said, yes, it's fine to have contradictions, which shocked me. And it's actually utter nonsense because it makes nonsense of communication. Because if something is true and false simultaneously, you can't really have communication.
Mm-hmm. So,
Uh,
so when it comes down to so first of all, what are the religious texts actually called?
they're called the Guru Granth Sahib.
So the Guru Granth Saman, is that right?
Sahib.
Okay. So within those texts, do they approach them in a way that, like, they would say that these words within this book, should be taken as like objective truth, or is it more like these words in these books should be taken as a general practice, general guide, but it's not necessarily dogmatic?
No, they revere their scriptures probably more than any other religion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they do believe it's subjective truth, but the practices in it are really subjective, mystical. They're based on subjective, mystical experience, and the goal is to become one with God,
Okay.
which is, why I said there's confusion about monism and pantheism, because on the one hand, you're to merge with God, and you're not really an individual. They say you are part of God,
Okay.
or your soul is a part of God,
Mm-hmm.
but you have forgotten, or you think you're different and an individual. So your goal is self-realization.
Okay.
Okay, in other words, you got to realize you're really God,
Hmm.
and once you do that, you apparently have merged into God, so to speak.
Okay.
And like a drop of water uh, is part of the ocean.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, so they believe that there's one God, but that God may or may not be like of this world, pantheistic, or do some of them believe that God is separate from this world, like entirely? So like Muslims would believe that God is completely separate from this world. Would there be would there be any Sikhs who would believe that?
Well, the vast majority, because they don't read their scriptures, are not really aware of all these. To
Okay.
them, God is a personal God.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that's maybe because of Islamic influence in the culture for the few hundred years that they ruled before the British came. But to the average person, God is a personal God, and he is. They probably don't even know what is monism, most of them. But they do believe their soul, the term is Atma, is of the same essence as God.
Okay. And do they believe in reincarnation then, like Hindus would?
Absolutely, they believe in reincarnation.
And so so Sikhs wouldn't be able to escape reincarnation until what? Like how does one then escape the reincarnation cycle to become one with God?
Well, the thing is in Sikhism, as I said, there's a concept of grace.
Mm-hmm.
So really, it's a mixture of good works, and one of the main concepts is seva or service, selfless service to humanity.
Okay.
Um, Obviously, being virtuous and a moral person, but ultimately, they do, or their scriptures do teach that it depends on the grace of God. You are going to be
Okay.
saved by the grace of God.
So they would then believe in concepts of right and wrong, sin and evil. So it's like they wouldn't reject the concept of sin necessarily.
No, they call it, the term is homi, which means, uh, it really means the ego self,
Okay.
the ego self.
So you
So,
well,
yeah,
it sounds almost like that they want to it sounds like then their moral practices are in regard to the community. Like someone who is selfless and seeks what's best for the community would be a moral person, and then by the grace of God, accompanied with this sort of moral attribute, they can escape reincarnation cycle to become one with God.
but then the scriptures also talk about a heaven and a hell.
Okay.
And there are a couple of Muslim authors of the scriptures. They're Sufis, like Farid.
Okay.
And obviously, his worldview is totally different to the Hindu Bhagats. So
Hmm.
people like him obviously are going to talk about a heaven and a
And this
hell.
is and this is in the scriptures of the Sikhs, you're saying.
These scriptures, and the
Was
scriptures also mention Adam.
was he wait, so this Sufi you're talking about, is he a guru or was he just a person that was mentioned?
He is Islamic, very much revered amongst Indians.
Hmm.
Uh, he is a Sufi Muslim.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And
and
so, well, you keep
and
going.
these Bhagats, all these Sufis, obviously, according to our worldview, the Christian worldview, because the law of God is written in our conscience, according to Romans,
Hmm.
and um, we are not totally fallen. We still have the image of God. Um, they will write some wonderful things about praising God, their own sinfulness. Um, so there are all truth is God's truth. Whether it's in the Quran, the Bible, or the Sikh scriptures. But when it becomes a mixture of truth and error, that's where the problem arises.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So is that kind of then with that, so the heaven and hell aspect of it, um, how does that play into Sikh belief then in regard to how people go there or how long people stay there? Like, how does that then play into their belief system?
It's not quite clear because, if you merge in God and your individual personality is gone, and then they also have the concept of being salvation while you're alive.
Okay.
Okay. Um, so which is hard to understand because if you merge in God and your same essence, what does that actually mean? And as far as heaven and hell is concerned, they are probably influenced by cultural ideas. What is, heaven? It's a place of bliss and happiness, but there's no consensus.
Okay. Is that pretty common then within so within Hinduism, I know that it's pretty common for different Hindus to focus in on different parts of the scriptures, and that will then dictate how they live their life in order to reach moksha. Is there a similar equivalent to Sikhism where people will focus in on different types of gurus or different type of scriptures, or different parts of their scriptures, and sort of follow those methods or those practices to reach um their end goal, or is there a difference there between Hinduism and Sikhism?
No, they believe their scriptures is the living guru. To them, it's a living guru.
Oh, okay,
So,
okay,
yeah, so they can't pick and choose.
okay. So they can't just focus in on one part or focus on another. They have to take all of it and follow it.
Yes. but there are 36 authors, and not only it contains the writings of the gurus, 6 of the gurus, not all of them, but there are also the writings, like I said, of the Bhagats who
Yeah.
predated the first guru by up to, I believe, 300 or 400 years. Some of them, were 100 or 200 years before the
And
first.
and what do these scriptures consist of? Are they mostly like philosophy? Are they mostly hymns? Are they mostly
They're,
like history? What are they?
that's very easy. They are hymns. The Sikhs, all Sikhs and scholars describe them as so many thousands of hymns by the first guru, by the second, etc. They're
Okay.
all described as hymns, praising God.
Mm.
And it is not until the last 30, every Guru Granth Sahib is 1430 pages, and every page will have the same content. And it's not until you get to the last about 30 pages where the gurus themselves are deified.
Mm.
And that is by the court poets of the fifth guru who compiled the scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard for Sikhs to explain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because on the one hand they're supposed to be 100% human, and yet they're described as God. Some people will say, oh no, they had the attributes of God, or like, we don't mean like eternality, but like compassion or mercy, etc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, so that's interesting. So that's sort of then the background history, sort of the general overview of their belief system and their scriptures. So let's pull it back here. This is sort of this would be the backdrop, the belief system that you would have grown up with as a child, right?
Thank you for listening to part 1 of this interview. I'll be releasing part 2 soon. So, as always, friends, go out there and light the world.